Wilson Whineray. He was an outstanding prop forward. He was All Black captain for a record number of 30 tests, and he was the greatest statesman both on and off the field in All Black history.
Wilson was the greatest captain I ever played under, and truly great. He was great at all occasions.
Whineray grew up in Auckland and initially preferred to play soccer. Fortunately for rugby, he changed codes in his mid-teens.
You know, soccer's probably the greatest ball game in the world, I guess, but it was just rugby was calling me more. I had a stronger pull to it.
Even then, rugby wasn't Whineray's only sport. He was a nationally ranked age group swimmer, an Auckland secondary school's champion gymnast, and the New Zealand University's heavyweight boxing champion.
He was a guy who could put his hand to anything and be good at it, and there are guys like that. Wilson Whineray was one of those fellows. No matter what he wanted to do, he was successful and probably one of the best.
But it was at rugby that this superb natural athlete really excelled. He was an 18-year-old farm cadet when he began a provincial rugby career that eventually spanned 6 provinces. In 1956, he played for the Canterbury and New Zealand University's teams that downed the touring Springboks, and the following year he made his All Black Test debut against Australia in the same match that began the Test career of another rugby legend, the pine tree himself, Colin Meads. Whineray was promoted to All Black captain for what was only his 3rd Test. The scene was Wellington's Athletic Park and the victims were the Wallabies. It was 1958 and the 23-year-old Whineray was the youngest All Black captain for 3 decades. To celebrate the occasion, he scored 2 tries himself.
And the New Zealand captain is over for the first try of the game.
In fact, they were the only 2 Test tries he ever scored.
As the ball comes loose, Whineray scoops it up and is over for his 2nd try.
Despite his youth, Whineray's authority was unquestionable.
Being a captain's a learning experience like everything else, and I think I became a good captain in my rugby days, but I'm not sure I was at the start, necessarily.
1959 was a particularly good year for Whineray. He began a marriage partnership with Elizabeth Seymour that's still going strong, 30 years and 3 children later. He moved to Auckland for his university studies and he led the Fred Allen-coached Auckland team in a successful raid on the Ranfurly Shield. Then came the British Lions.
But even from 50 yards out, Don Clark's boot is also formidable.
With the help of Don Clark's colossal goal kicking, Whineray's All Blacks tamed the Lions, beating them 3-1 in the Test series. Whineray captained the All Blacks to 22 Test victories, but his record also included one of the most controversial Test losses in rugby history. It was the 4th Test against the Springboks in 1960. Losing this game meant losing the series, the only Test series the All Blacks lost under Whineray's captaincy. But though Frank McMullen appeared to score the try that could have drawn the series, the referee said no.
McMillan gets over, but the referee calls him back.
That was clearly a try, or the film, the unanimous view that it was a try. But at the end of the day, it's gone and there's no use worrying about it.
Whineray's own game was on one level a rock-solid prop.
Whineray shakes off a tackle, looks for support.
But he had a great love of running rugby.
To Tremain, onto Stan Meads, to John Graham. To Tremain.
The greatest thrill in rugby is running with the ball. I think I was always at heart a loose forward, deep down in my soul.
He was mobile. He was probably a bit faster than a lot of props in the modern game. He always fancied himself that he might be a very good loose forward until he tried playing one game against Aberdeen and made a complete hash of it. He couldn't get back into the front row quick enough.
During the 1961 French tour of New Zealand, some of the play got pretty rugged, but the former heavyweight boxing champion was always the statesman, as Colin Meads remembers.
One of our backs went down and this fella came in and kicked him, and you know, quite viciously, and so I come storming in and I was going to take justice. Wilson, you know, pulled me back and said, no, come on, that's not on, you know, you let them, and say a minute or so later I scored a try.
It's Colin Meads who dives over for the try.
And he said, that's the way you prove to them who's better players. And, you know, it always stuck in my mind, you know, Wilson saying that to me.
There wasn't anyone in the team that I hadn't somehow mixed with that sort of person, was comfortable with. And then beyond that, I think you just try and do these sensible and honourable things. Treat people fairly, listen to what they've got to say, try and pull it together, and on the field, at the end of the day, you've got to be quite firm because you haven't got time to have a consultation and sit around and have a vote on anything.
In 1963, Whineray faced the Welsh on their hallowed home turf. No All Black team had ever won a Test match on Cardiff Arms Park, and Whineray was determined his team would be the first, and they were.
Watt steps inside Hayward's tackle, and New Zealand go into a 6-point lead.
On the same field, a few months later, they played another very special game, this time against the Barbarians. The All Blacks led 6-3 at half-time, but the final score was a massive 36-3 hiding for the Barbars.
Magnificent dummy, Whineray. Oh, I hope he scores it himself. Yes, he has. Oh, marvellous.
When I scored my try, it sort of just capped a tour, I suppose, the symbolic thing of a captain finishing the thing off. And it was the best rugby that I've ever been part of. And the crowd started picking up the clapping and cheering and All Blacks and singing well before the end.
But even Whineray wasn't perfect.
His worst habit was he hated training. He was one of the worst trainers we've had on tour.
Whineray stepped down from first-class rugby for a year to concentrate on his commerce studies at university. But in 1965, he was back, leading the All Blacks for the home series against the Springboks. By the time of the fourth test at Eden Park, the All Blacks led the series 2-1. Whineray announced that this game would be his last. And what a game it was. They trounced the Boks, 20-3. Today, the retired All Black captain is a captain of industry, Deputy Managing Director of New Zealand multinational giant Carter Holt Harvey. But what was the essence of Wilson Whineray's greatness?
Wilson Whineray had an air of being something more than what most rugby players generally were. He was an educated man. He carried that responsibility of captaincy of many things extremely well.
Whether it was the drunk on the street in Cardiff or whatever country you were in, he could handle that guy so nicely, or whether it was at Buckingham Palace with the Queen. You know, Wilson was always at ease and did it delightfully well.
I perhaps like to think that somewhere along the way there was a young fellow or two that were moved to reach out and try a bit harder for themselves, to find a bit more in their game and their character and help them with their growing up.
So rugby's greatest statesman had moved on. Who could possibly fill boots that big? Obvious contenders were Colin Meads, KEL TREMAIN, Ken Gray. Great players with years of All Black experience and substantial public profiles. But rugby's top job went to an outsider. But the All Blacks' next captain had quite a different quality. Brian Lahore, a farmer from Ekatahuna, was a country boy who had greatness thrust upon him, and he wore it well. Brian Lahore grew up in the Wairarapa, and like Whineray before him, his sporting talents were not confined to rugby. He was a provincial rep tennis player as well, but rugby had that extra attraction.
Well, I guess like about 100,000 other little New Zealand boys, my ambition was to be an All Black.
The young Lahore was what today would call hyperactive. He was very fit, but the future All Black captain was so skinny, people actually worried about him.
In fact, I was supposed to go to health camp, I think, just after the war, when they did surveys on kids in schools and that weren't getting enough to eat, but which horrified my mother, of course, because there was never any lack of food in our household.
Lahore trialled for the Wairarapa primary school reps and made the team, so the story goes, without actually touching the ball.
You know, I was a little wee shy country boy. I think I was playing flanker where, you know, if you can't think of any place to put a guy, you put him as flanker. And I chased the ball around all day, but I just didn't quite touch it. But I got in the team, and I think that selector's a marvellous selector. He's still a friend of mine now.
Lahore's provincial rugby began at the age of 18, and though he's remembered as a number 8, the last man down in the All Black scrum, his first few years for Wairarapa were played at breakaway. In fact, Lahore was selected at number 8 for the 63-64 All Black tour of the British Isles without ever having played in that position. He well remembers the shock of that announcement.
I went through the locks, I went through the flankers, and my name wasn't in either of those, so you know how you sort of think, oh well, back to the farm. And then, as amazingly enough, I was called out at number 30 as number 8, a position that, funnily enough, I had never played in my life, even in social rugby. But it was amazing how what an inspirational choice it was, because it's a position that absolutely suited my game. It was made for me, really.
Earlier that year, Lahore had married Pam Young. She too had grown up in the country, and just as well. Through the long All Black tours ahead, someone had to look after their farm and 3 children. In 1965, Lahore was 25 and last man down for what he describes as a Rolls-Royce All Black pack that included Whineray, the Meads brothers, Colin and Stan, KEL TREMAIN and Ken Gray. It was heady stuff, but a year later, the number 8 became the number 1. ahead of several more senior players.
Well, it didn't worry me at all because I had no illusions about being captain and, you know, had no desire to be an All Black captain. I was captain of a King Country team and I thought that was my level.
So in the end, I think it was the right decision, even though I might have been a bit snaky at the time and thought I should have got it.
He was very tolerant, understanding. He had a great grip of the game. When it came to leading, he led by example.
I was very fortunate that I had the support of some very close and loyal friends, and they still are, Ken Gray, KEL TREMAIN and Colin Meads. Now those guys, each of them came and said, we're here, we're going to support you, you know, we're all in it together, and boy, that made my job a lot easier.
Brian Lahore makes his debut as captain of New Zealand in the first test of 1966 against Campbell Lamerton's British Isles 15.
Like Whineray, 8 years before him, Lahore scored a try in his debut test match as captain.
Lahore races up outside and the New Zealand captain forces his way over for a fine try.
I don't think I scored a lot of tries for the All Blacks, but it's nice to score one, I guess, on your debut day as captain. I think I was just pleased to get it over with. I was just pleased that we won that day.
In fact, Lahore led the All Blacks to an awesome 14 straight test victories, spanning 4 years, a record achievement for an All Black captain. The All Blacks were unbeaten when they faced the Barbarians for the last match of their 1967 tour of Europe. But 10 minutes from the end, defeat seemed inevitable.
2 minutes of the match to go. New Zealand's unbeaten record almost gone. Not quite. Laidlaw again. Out to Curtin. Davis. This is a great chance for Tony Steele. It must be a try if he passes. Oh, and he had the spare man, but it is a try for McRae.
We were leading 6-3, and I thought, oh, to be on a winning side against the All Blacks. And Myron Joseph was the referee, and he was a Welsh guy. And I remember telling Myron, come on, Myron, you know, turn the old, get forward, you know, 3 minutes, what a... And of course, typical All Blacks, they scored 2 tries in the last 3 minutes. Again, come second.
Tony Steele is going to score. It's a wonderful try, and the New Zealanders have saved their unbeaten record.
In 1969, Wales made an historic first tour to New Zealand. In a word, the men in black walloped the Welsh. And the man who inspired them to greatness was their captain, Brian Lahore. Lahore's wave of success extended through the beginning of the 1970 tour of South Africa. By the time of the first test against the Springboks, his All Blacks hadn't lost for 52 matches. But this was their Waterloo.
Yeah, we were actually very shocked by the intensity of the South African side.
The Springbok Test series was lost 3-1, and not long after, Lahore realised something about himself.
You've got to be hungry, you've got to want to do it. And I didn't know whether I had that fire in my belly still. And I came home and said to Pam that I'm going to retire. She nearly probably fell out of the kitchen, I guess.
So the man from Ekatahuna stepped down from rugby's top job. His achievements were obvious and outstanding. But what made Brian Lahore special?
Brian Lahore was a fellow who had... he was just an average fellow when he joined the All Black teams and had the responsibility of captaincy thrown upon him. A responsibility which he wore, I think, in the end with greatness.
He often used to come to you and say, well, come on, we need a bit of help here. Some of the greatest rugby I probably played was when Brian became captain because, you know, he'd ask me for that help.
I think the best captains are born, not made. I think you can actually probably be taught how to captain a side, but if you have to really think about doing the right things at the right time, I think it's too late sometimes.
16 years later, he was back in the public eye as the coach of the All Blacks, who won the very first Rugby World Cup in 1987. He's back on the farm again now, but Brian Lahore, the country boy, will always be one of the legends of All Black history.
I would like to be remembered as just a very down-to-earth, genuine fellow who had a lot of caring for the players that I had with me and under me.
The year Brian Lahore played his last test, an 18-year-old from Taranaki was making his mark in university rugby. Like Lahore, he was from a farming background, and he too would become a great All Black captain. The 1970s saw another great leader of the pack, Graham Murray. Like Lahore, Murray was a country boy, but with a difference. Murray was university educated, politically liberal, and the first modern All Black captain. He faced the biggest rugby dilemma of the time, South Africa, and made a lone stand that would go down in history. He was blessed with an intelligence that enabled him to read the game and his teammates profoundly well, and he's second only to Wilson Whineray in terms of the number of test sides he captained. Captaincy aside, he was one of rugby's truly outstanding loose forwards.
What made him so much better than any other open side that I've been associated with was that he could read the differences in what was going on. You know, he could tactically appreciate a game minute by minute.
I credit him with having changed the face of the modern game.
At the age of 15, Murray was made captain of the Opanaki High School First 15 over many older players.
I guess he felt that I had something which could offer, and I guess it was perhaps a love for the game and intensity about myself in terms of the way I wanted to play the game.
Murray was selected for the first All Black tour of Argentina, and the very first time he pulled on an All Black jersey, Graham Murray was captain.
I was very apprehensive and perhaps lacking a little bit of confidence about my own captaincy skills, and I think in some ways that probably wasn't detrimental, because it really meant I had to get in and think a lot more about what I was doing, and not to accept that I was there as a captain by right.
The team that toured Argentina was a second-string squad, and that 30 players who'd been to South Africa weren't eligible for selection, but there was nothing second-rate about their playing. Murray's men were unbeaten throughout the tour. And Murray won in the romance stakes as well when he met Argentinian Claudia Servin, whom he later married.
Dalton!
In 1978, Murray led the All Blacks on the second of his 5 successful raids on Europe. During the 18-match tour of Britain, he became the only All Black captain ever to achieve the Grand Slam, defeating Ireland, Wales, England and Scotland.
There was a pretty limited physique and in some ways a limited skill level in that team, but they really just put everything on the line every time they took the field, and the attitude was tremendous off the field.
2 years later, on the 1980 tour of Wales, Murray hit the peak of his career.
He had a fantastic tour. He played extremely well, and of course he scored a classic try in the test against Wales, probably one of the greatest tries that I've witnessed anyway.
The try for Stu Wilson. Murray. Oh, magnificent! A great try at the corner for the All Black captain.
The next year, the Springboks came to New Zealand for a tour that split New Zealand politically and emotionally and sparked a storm of protest that will haunt the nation for at least living memory. Graham Murray made an unprecedented lone stand against the rugby union. The All Black captain of 5 years was a conscientious objector.
Leaders have a responsibility to make value judgments. I felt that the South African situation was wrong morally. I felt it was wrong for rugby, and I felt it was wrong for New Zealand. I don't have any regrets about having made the decision, but I guess I do feel pretty strongly that I should never have had to make it. The charitable conclusion I've always come to is that the New Zealand Rugby Union really decided that it was going to be good for rugby. I guess I was always apprehensive about whether I'd be selected again. I didn't think I'd be selected as of right.
But Murray was too good to be shut out, and he successfully led the All Blacks against France in late 81 and Australia in 82. In Murray's last match for New Zealand, his team thrashed Australia and brought the Bledisloe Cup, the symbol of Trans-Tasman rivalry, back where it belongs. Then it was time to retire.
You know, if you're obsessed with doing one thing, other things suffer. So I guess when I was playing rugby, I would say my personal life suffered.
About the time of his retirement, Murray's marriage broke up, and he got in a row with the rugby union over royalties for his autobiography. Typically, he stood up for his rights. The irony is that one of rugby's sharpest minds is now banned from coaching the game. But what was it about this man that made him such an outstanding captain?
Graham Murray was a superb captain. He was a great player. He was a master tactician, and he got on very well with his players.
Graham's form of motivation was different from most. He used to analyse an individual, I think, and work out what the best way of motivating each individual was. And you know, it depended on the character of the person, the way he approached it. But he was very, very good at that. It was very effective.
And yet, in the end, this great tactician and motivator was never really one of the boys.
I think Graham likes to be a bit of a loner. He doesn't like to let you get very close to him.
He was a loner, a real loner, and is today. He's a recluse.
Today, Murray has a new partner and a child, but he has no involvement with rugby and, in fact, rarely sees his old teammates, though he does want to be remembered by them.
The people that look at you as an All Black And as an All Black captain, they only see one side of you, and it's the players that you tour with and how they see the complete side of you. You know, they're the people that I'd like to remember me as a person.
OK, now it's time to start some arguments. Who was the greatest? Of Whineray, Lahore and Murray, who was the greatest leader of the pack? Murray was exceptionally intelligent. He got the Grand Slam and he displayed an extraordinary moral courage. Lahore developed the most, from his country boy origins to his eventual superstar status, and he achieved the highest percentage of wins. Whineray, the statesman, captained far more All Black teams and in the end had more victories. And his awesome leadership qualities transcended rugby to make him a captain of New Zealand industry. There's no right answer, but for my money, I'd go for Wilson Whineray. And I'll let you fight about that at